Shoenice became famous for eating things you're not supposed to. But while others turned their viral videos into careers as content creators, he ended up divorced.
Either way, can you have your mom start the divorce proceedings?
Homeless.
Because I'm sleeping out on the side of a fucking mall.
Alcoholic, and downright insane.
Where you at, OG Geezer? I know you drive this highway!
To make matters worse, ever since he blew up, he was plagued with accusations of lying, scamming, and much worse.
Anyone that knows simple math knows that that puts the girl at about 14, 15 years old when she met Chris and had this relationship with him.
But just how did he fall this far? Shoenice's real name is Christopher Shoe, and we only know who he was before his online presence through his own retellings. According to him, his parents separated when he was a child, and he grew up with 2 brothers and his mom in a 1-bedroom place. As she unfortunately developed a drinking problem, the kids became increasingly rowdy, spray painting people's houses and getting up to antics that got them kicked out of many of the apartments they stayed in. Even at this point, Chris already had the ability to eat unusual things, from grass to pebbles to eating cake ingredients during his home economics class. This became such a phenomenon that the teachers knew that Chris's group projects never got finished because they ran out of supplies before they could do their work. And eventually, his mother's drinking habit got so bad that she was regularly blacking out and not being able to feed Chris and his brothers, at which point their father took them in.
You know, my father eventually came and got us, and times went on.
This might have been a little late since Chris had already developed a drinking habit of his own, as he was regularly getting blackout drunk as early as 8th grade. He also engaged in other unsavory activities that are not related to drinking.
You would charge the neighborhood kids to watch your dad bang your stepmom.
Stepmother, she was Russian. Good people.
Good people. How much money did you make in that racket?
I don't know. I was in 8th grade.
Right. And did you ever beat off watching that?
Never.
No, okay.
It's one thing selling tickets to the neighbor's kids, but damn, it's your dad's dick, bro. Doesn't sound good.
But surprisingly, this wasn't the worst thing he engaged in during this time. In a later video, he confesses to having stolen money from his dad multiple times, as well as stealing his car. Last but not least, he retells one fateful instance in which the private school he was attending was holding some kind of party, during which he spiked the punch bowl with his own piss and joyfully watched as everyone at the school unknowingly drank his piss. From 90-year-old nuns to the little kids. Despite how clearly dark this time was, Chris has a very positive outlook on this part of his life, proudly remarking that he was voted the class clown in 2 different high schools. He even mentioned his class clown status on his LinkedIn, listing wrestling and women as his high school pastimes. Despite his fond memories, his late teens saw his alcoholism progress into general drug abuse. Chris took every opportunity he had to use any substance, regardless of what it was. Thankfully, before he could spiral into a more extreme form of addiction, his father noticed it and sent him to rehab. Unfortunately, this didn't work too well, and when he came back, he instantly went back to his substance abuse, prompting his dad to tell him he had to move out. After a short stint living with his older brother and working as a roofer, Chris had to return to high school, meaning he had to stay with his mom. He described this period of his life as particularly dangerous since the school he went to was rife with gang activity, to the point that the principal apparently had half of his ear cut off. When he spoke to his mom about quitting high school, she had no problem with it, on the condition that he enlisted in the army, which he promptly did. Chris was deployed to Kuwait in 1991 and worked in the food supply chain, during which time he retells a story about having saved 2 little kids who were stuck in a dune by feeding them ravioli. If this is true, I'd say this partially redeems the punch bowl incident. Only partially though. He also claims this gave him his long-standing objective of ending world hunger, which is an interesting backstory for a guy who became famous for eating insane things. In another retelling of his time in the army, he claims to have worked plumbing, which according to him is the US Army's name for when you pour diesel into the metal cans where all the soldiers are shitting in, and then lighting them on fire, as Chris himself describes in great detail. But his class clown identity also carried into the army. When it came time to shave his head, he asked the barber to draw a question mark on the top of his head. When his drill sergeant discovered this, Chris was punished by having to eat mystery meat off a tray on the ground. Not that he had any real problem with that. He also claims to have been offered to leave deployment early with a Purple Heart after he fell off a vehicle while loading up MREs onto pallets, where he accidentally hit his head. But he refused to accept it so he could stay in the army for longer. On a much darker note, Chris's time in the military was marked by his involvement in a very tragic accident.
I was driving up into the thing, and I had ran over something that definitely lifted up the side of the truck, and I was like, oh my god. I jump out and there's a soldier laying on the ground, and I'm like, oh my god, dude, I hit you, I can't believe it. And he just, the way his torso was turned, I knew it was just a matter of time, and he was just like, no, you weren't the one that hit me, you were the second one that hit me. And I'm like, oh my god, dude, I'm so sorry. So there's no like radio communication. I just started screaming help. We're in the middle of a sandstorm. I'm talking like right now, but he was screaming at at me. I was screaming at him. Blood was coming out of the mouth. And the last thing he said was, "Can you just tell somebody in my platoon, tell my wife and kids that I love them?" And I said, "No problem, bro, no problem." I got up and I just ran to the tent, got a MASH unit out there, threw him in the Humvee. They brought him. I didn't even find out for a couple days that he had died, but I had a mission to do.
Immediately after retelling this grim incident, he reveals he actually forgot about what the dying soldier had asked him to do. And instead of delivering the message to the man's wife, when Chris came home, he traveled around and blew all of his money in Vegas. It was only 3 months later that he went through his belongings from his time in the army and found the paper he'd written her address on and remembered what he was supposed to do. But at that point, he had already spent all of his money and couldn't afford to travel to where the man's wife lived, so he just wrote her a letter instead.
But before we go any further, a word from our sponsor.
Hey there! Looks like you didn't heed my warning, did you, little guy? Apparently, my message was lost on all of you. I said never goon. Not even once. Which is why I made this new swag t-shirt. See this t-shirt right here? We've got this beautiful runic writing, ancient manuscripts to remind you of what you can never do. It's got this epic death metal font you can kind of read sometimes, and an extremely tasteful acid wash to make it look more vintage for all you vintage kids out there who can't stop thinking about vintage things. It's vintage. Buy it, it's vintage. But it's getting so gosh darn cold out here. I mean, how am I supposed to not goon to keep warm? What am I gonna do? Oh, that's right. I made a pullover.
I heard that you've been gooning. What did I tell you, you fool, you little gooner? The scarecrow beckons. It is said by the Ancient One that gooning brings on unforeseen Euclidean horrors.
What does Euclidean mean? I don't know. Euclidean is a word. Euclid. SCP! It's also acid wash. We've got some cool designs here on the sleeves, on the front, on the back. We've got some cool imagery, messaging. It's good merch, okay? That's the point. It's good merch. It's high quality. I'm not even trying to talk it up too much here, but it is good merch. And if you like it, it's a great way to support the channel. And it's available only on turkeytom.shop for a limited time right now. And when it's gone, you won't be able to get it again. So, yeah. Thanks for buying. If you don't buy it, thanks for watching. But buy it. And don't goon. Or whatever, never goon, whatever you do.
Buy my merch, and whatever you do, never goon.
Now back to the video.
There's no real reason for him to have lied about this particular tale since it doesn't really make him look good, and he's clearly not joking, so much so that he eventually made an update calling out the people who were attacking him for potentially having injured or killed another soldier. In the middle of him retelling his army stories, he also makes a passing mention of once having fought off 20 police officers. While there's very little information about this online, a lawsuit dating back to 1993 describes 2 police officers being called to a party to break up a fight between 2 men. One of these men, identified as Christopher Shoe, is said to have attacked a police officer and put him in a chokehold until the other cop struck him with a baton. This incident happened in one of the cities Shoenice is known to have lived in, and given his history of being a rowdy drunk guy and his later claims to have served time for fighting cops, it's not hard to believe that this is the same guy. Regardless of all this craziness in his earlier life, it seems he did settle down a few years after returning to the US, as he became a family man, getting married and having a son. Fast forward a few years to 2008, and his now 8-year-old son made an account for him on YouTube. Chris stayed inactive for 2 years until December 2010, when he decided to act on his love for comedy by dropping this gem of a video.
Our family tree is shaped like a marijuana leaf. When my dad wanted us to learn how to read when we were little, he got us hooked on chronics.
If this seems more like an amateur stand-up routine instead of a typical YouTube video, it's because that's exactly what it is. On LinkedIn, he says he worked as a stand-up comedian for 5 years. I also have to point out here that his jokes about weed aren't just for the sake of comedy, but instead it was a recurring obsession of his. According to Chris, marijuana is the way he treated his Crohn's disease. Unfortunately, due to Chris's lack of tact and familiarity with what kind of content really worked on YouTube, his channel didn't immediately take off, and it went completely unnoticed for a few years. During this period, Chris got some recognition not for his videos, but for having chained himself to a fountain during a protest in 2011. This protest was over the cancellation of Fountain Day, a traditional celebration of the university Chris was enrolled in at the time to study sociology. There are plenty of videos of this incident due to how unusual it was, especially since it looked like Chris was the only person protesting, while the rest of the people there were just looking at him in awe. In one of the interviews he did during this time, without any prompt from the interviewer, he started talking about how he wasn't doing this to promote himself, since he had already published a book and was about to go on a comedy tour, neither of which I was able to find anything about. However, as soon as the topic of his YouTube channel came up, he immediately started giving the little audience that had gathered around him a performative autobiography, almost as if this was the plan all along. Even this early on, some people were pointing out that Chris had a tendency to bend the truth to get his point across, but due to how obscure of a personality he was an uphill battle to expose it. Based on the way he carried himself, this was, without a doubt, a publicity stunt to promote his YouTube channel. In an article written about his protest, it said he brought 2 adult diapers, a bottle of water, and no food, claiming he would stay there for 3 days without eating anything. He also added that he couldn't free himself as he had given the handcuff keys to a friend who would only arrive once the 3 days had elapsed. Unsurprisingly, he was gone within 1 day, but his goal was actually met since the link to his YouTube channel was featured in the updated article. By 2012, Shoenice had officially exploded in popularity. And this is proved by the fact there was a Jaltoid video about him, which at the time meant you were a certified big deal. Do you guys remember when animation channels were massive all over YouTube? I kinda miss it a lot. The West has fallen. Anyway, his videos were getting extremely popular, although I can't show a lot of the most popular ones because they'd violate the current terms of service because they technically depict dangerous acts. To put it simply, Chris ate things he wasn't supposed to eat, some of which could kill an average person. As his videos got traction from legacy media outlets like True TV's World's Dumbest and Vice Media, thousands of people were now getting to watch this man eat rolls of toilet paper, drink rubbing alcohol, eat tampons, and many other inedible items that would make pretty much anyone gag. He also took part in an Ask Me Anything on Reddit, where we get early signs that maybe becoming famous wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. For example, he got called out on his Fountain Day stunt and not only admitted that it was just a stunt for publicity, but also added that the reason he did it was because he wanted to quit university anyway. In a much more concerning development, after a few comments asked about it, Chris confirms that he's no longer with his wife and she had kicked him out of the house. Coinciding with this are accusations that he was scamming his followers on Facebook, asking for money and claiming he was broke and couldn't afford food, only to quickly renege on his promise to pay them back and boast about having spent all the donated money on alcohol and weed, admitting to never being broke in the first place. This wasn't just covered on Reddit either. A small YouTube account uploaded a video right around the same time showing Chris asking for money on Facebook, suggesting that his wife had somehow gotten control of his finances and that he needed to go to Boston to close out his bank. This same video also pointed out that in recent months, Chris had become belligerent towards his followers. He had been uploading many videos in which he was extremely drunk, which was clear evidence he was going down the same rabbit hole of alcoholism that his mother did. It was clear that his mental state was rapidly deteriorating as a consequence of his drug use and separation from his family. Though we only discover the details of what went on behind the scenes much later, the results are immediately evident. For example, one of Vice's many articles about him during this peak covered his masterful rapping.
Hey everyone, Shoenice again. Been eating crazy since I was 10. Tampons, pine cones, cigs and rocks, even ate a pair of dirty socks.
One may be inclined to think that this is just funny and not a sign of him slowly going nuts, but believe me, it gets a whole lot worse than an awful rap song. In early 2013, Vice did a proper documentary on him, and it cleared up a few of the rumors that were swirling around online. They talk about his recent bout of intense alcoholism and his strained relationship with his family, where Shoenice says that his ex-wife was having a tough time handling his newfound YouTube fame, and that he was slowly but surely pushed out of the house. Once he realized he was now homeless and no longer able to see his son, he started drinking again, after 6 years of sobriety. Soon after the documentary came out, it was also announced that he had been arrested. This supposedly happened because an old lady mistakenly identified him as the person who stole something from her car. It's very hard to make out what he says here due to the low volume and poor audio quality, but considering he uses this story to ask his fans for more money, it's possible that this didn't happen. However, a few weeks after this announcement, there is record of a different arrest, not for stealing, but for disorderly intoxication. Other dark moments of this documentary include him acknowledging the toll the alcohol takes on his body, revealing that the one time he had to get his stomach pumped wasn't from any unusual stunt, but instead from alcohol poisoning. Specifically, he drank Devil Springs, a bottle of 160 proof, and after, he became lethargic and passed out, only to wake up with a tube down his throat. He adds that the alcohol is what makes him seek out other drugs, mentioning that the 2 times he smoked crack in his life were a direct result of being on a bender.
The only 2 times I ever smoked crack in my life was when I was drunk. I would never even think about walking down the street looking for a bump at 4 in the morning going like this.
Overall, the documentary paints a pretty grim picture of a man who no longer had any reason to take care of his health and well-being. As a result, he regularly risked his life for content because he had nothing better to do. For those who are only looking at the surface of Shoenice's online presence where he was eating weird things and being funny, things were normal. Well, normal for his standards, with him doing things like painting his entire head white and eating lit matches for a Guinness World Record. But underneath it all, it wasn't hard to see that Chris was really struggling with the loss of his family. But people weren't calling him out for this. If anything, they empathized and felt bad for what he was going through. What they didn't feel bad for was his shameless grifting. In this video, he asked for money to buy weed and beer, being very, very upfront about it. I'm not sure if this is better because he's no longer lying about how he uses the money, or if it's worse because he doesn't even care enough to come up with a real excuse. In the same month as the documentary on him came out, someone uploaded a video compiling all the known instances of Shoenice scamming his fans, which naturally a lot of people were unhappy about. Chris can be seen asking for sums as measly as $100, followed by a former fan revealing that Shoenice once asked him for $500, supposedly because Chris's car had been towed. Under the belief he would be paid back soon, this guy sent him the money, and within 3 days, Chris asked for another $500, but he was never paid back, probably because Chris never intended to. Chris didn't even try to keep his story straight, as he would often outright admit to his lenders that he used the money to buy more drugs. In the Vice documentary, he claimed to regularly get $400 or even more by deploying his talents at local bars. But based on these witness accounts from people who gave him money, it seems he made his living very differently than what he told the journalists. After his peak in popularity around the middle of 2012, his growth seriously slowed down, dampening his dreams of going viral for his stunts and becoming a millionaire. For the next couple years, he didn't lose any of his following and got a decent amount of attention for his size, but due to his strained relationship with his community and the sheer strange and generally low production value of his content, becoming a huge channel was simply not an option for him. He made no effort to adapt his format to the new content standards on YouTube and instead continued to regularly e-beg for drugs.
Hey everyone, Shoenice again. Well, basically I lost my ATM card and I want to smoke more weed and get drunk still for Bike Week. So my PayPal information's below me. This isn't begging. You don't have to give me a dime. Don't give a rat's ass. I got rich fans out there with trust funds. They don't even miss $10. You know who you are. Please PayPal me some cash so I can go see the pot dealer. At least I'm honest. Jeez. Thank you.
It's bad enough he was openly asking for drug money from an audience that was mostly comprised of kids, but what makes it worse is that he frequently talked about how his channel was meant to solve world hunger, and though he had some ideas on how he could accomplish this, none of them were realistic, nor did he ever try to put them into practice. It's also worth noting that he quickly deleted the videos in which he asked for money, clearly so he could hide his dark habits from anyone who hadn't seen them. Harkening back to the claim that being drunk made him look for other substances, around this time he posted a video of himself taking MDMA, which he said he'd never done before. This was very concerning and yet another sign of his rapidly deteriorating health. On his Facebook page, he lamented not having seen his son in years, but given his recent behavior, that wasn't going to change anytime soon. Meanwhile, on Twitter, he was threatening to delete his videos if his network didn't loan him $500. While media networks definitely have a bad history of exploiting the people who make the mistake of signing with them, what's strange here is that he's only asking for $500 in the form of a loan, not even a direct payment. This clearly suggests that this wasn't some kind of dispute over money owed to him, because if that was the case, he just asked to be paid. Instead, this was another case of him being desperate for drug money and doing things that don't really make sense to get it. Still, it does seem he genuinely fell for the trap of multi-channel networks, which were really popular around the time, and ultimately just took money from creators without providing much value to them. At first, he posted videos promoting and singing the praises of his network, but then he revealed he couldn't leave his contract and was making 30% of what he used to through YouTube, with the rest of it going to the network. This was just one of the major problems Chris was facing in 2014. As just a few months into the year, he actually got into his first YouTube beef with someone by the name of Ted Barris. Ted claimed that Chris faked his alcohol slam videos, pointing to things like the bottles already being cracked by the time the camera started rolling as evidence that Chris had replaced the alcohol with something else. But this was the lightest of Ted's accusations, as in a video he posted in March of that year, he claimed that Chris scammed kids, had outstanding warrants in New York, and most damning of all, he claimed that someone who personally knew Chris accused him of being a creep. This was the beginning of Chris's war against Ted Barris, which is ongoing to this day.
Ted Barris and his homosexual love for me. Yes, blame Ted Barris for me leaving YouTube. Suck my YouTube, kiss my Google. You will never see a video on here again. Blame Ted Barris, people. Go in the link below me, because I have a new website and Lively. And like I said, Ted Barris is to blame for this. The chilly idiot.
Later on in the year, after having fallen for and subsequently denounced all channel networks, Chris somehow found himself in a different kind of network, a pyramid scheme. And you can tell that's what it is because the guy he had on to explain it began by immediately saying it definitely wasn't a pyramid scheme. I wasn't able to find any of Chris's video where he talked about this scam again, so I'm guessing this was just one of the many videos he quietly deleted and pretended never existed. A while after, one of Shoenice's detractors decided to call up the guy Chris was doing the pyramid scheme with, and he had this to say.
I am so offices. I had contacted Shoenice before that because he had mentioned he was going to come out to Denver. He's like, well, can you help me get out there? So I paid for a train ticket. Yeah, I get him out here. He says, I just need a couple nights at the hotel. Okay, fine. It has ended up being lie after lie after motherfucking lie.
As much as this solidifies how much of a compulsive liar Shoenice is, I gotta give him credit for owning his own partner in a pyramid scheme. You don't see that every day. As for the accusations that have been raised regarding him being some kind of creep, they came from someone called Wheezy, who had taken part in many of Shoenice's videos. And I really want to clarify here that these accusations should be taken with a major grain of salt. In the video promoting the pyramid scheme, Chris revealed he was in Denver, where Wheezy first came into contact with him. During the time he spent being friends with him, Wheezy noticed a few strange things about him. For example, he never saw Chris with a woman, yet he'd heard him on the phone with someone saying extremely explicit things. In one instance, Wheezy asked Chris why he never brought the girl on the phone around, but Chris just blew the question off without providing any real answer. A few weeks later, and after several more calls of the same kind, they suddenly stopped, with Chris claiming that he decided to break up with this mysterious girlfriend. When that happened, Wheezy claims he started getting comments on his channel from this girl and decided to talk to her. As they spoke, she apparently said she was 21, but that she first got with Chris 5 years prior when she would have been 16. According to Wheezy, during this relationship, Chris pretended to be romantically interested in her mom so that he had an excuse to keep going to her place. Eventually, Chris came clean to the girl's mom, admitting that he was into younger girls, at which point she no longer allowed Chris to visit them. Wheezy adds that while Chris was still living in a hotel in Florida, he was notified that a detective was looking into him, at which point he fled to Denver and continued to talk to the underage girl over the phone for a while. Now, I want to reiterate here that these accusations have no direct proof, and I personally have not seen anything that leads me to believe that Chris is a creep. But obviously, even having a story like this is pretty concerning, since you can try to make amends and come back from being a liar or a scammer, especially when you're struggling with addiction. But these kinds of accusations aren't the kind you can come back from if you can't disprove them. Which begs the question, how did Chris respond? I'll let you see for yourself.
There ain't nothing you gonna me, Wheezy. I'll destroy your world, dude. I know. Facebook. Cute little girl. Nice high school, bro. Is that your daughter? It hurts. It hurts. I know. It hurts. You know. My son's a bag, so when you ripped on him, I didn't care. I'm gonna f her in the ass, bro. I'm gonna f her in the ass.
There's really nothing I could say to make this look worse than it already does. Of course, once again, I want to remind you all that Wheezy's claims are just allegations. No evidence has been provided to the public, therefore, don't just believe it. One of the things that was provided to supposedly incriminate Chris is a set of YouTube comments supposedly made by this girl herself, where she called him a PDF file and compared him to Bill Cosby. Now, this isn't directly related to the matter at hand, but on the topic of Shoenice and Bill Cosby, my lawyers have informed me that I have to show you this masterpiece.
No, Your Honor. I did not put the pill in the drink. I put it in the Jell-O pudding because it's so good.
Eventually, the supposed victim herself made a video addressing the accusations.
Morons. Leave Shoenice the fuck alone. First of all, he's innocent. He never me. Understood?
What's of note here is that she doesn't explain her connection to Shoenice and doesn't really give any new information. Instead, she opts to say that Chris didn't assault her, which was not the only accusation being made, more so that she was groomed. Because of her strange demeanor, many people thought that she might have still felt some attachment to Chris and made this defense of him as a desperate attempt to earn his approval. Regardless of speculation about her mannerisms, the burden of proof is on the people making the claim that Chris groomed her. As far as solid evidence of him doing anything to a minor, there doesn't appear to be anything concrete establishing that Chris did something to this girl. He did eventually threaten to file a lawsuit against Wheezy, but it doesn't seem like anything came of it. One poster who claimed to have closely followed the story did say, "I can also confirm that Shoenice has done some shady stuff in the past in that regard, having made numerous advances over Facebook towards underage girls, openly admitting to touching himself to not safe for work images of underage girls, and claiming that doing it was not a crime in one video. The Facebook accounts he had several years ago were extremely creepy, with most of his fan base being teenage girls. Numerous people have come out saying he made inappropriate advances over Facebook Messenger when they were underage. There's been no shortage of accusations in that department. Despite how extreme these accusations were, they stayed well out of the spotlight due to the confusing nature of the never-ending beefs Shoenice had with a dozen people in the eating weird stuff and slamming alcohol community, which was and is an actual community on YouTube, believe it or not. One particular beef that got a lot of traction comes from a video by someone named Tubes in 2017, where he claimed he made some thumbnails for Shoenice but was never paid. Instead, he got emails from Chris saying that he only had $2 in his PayPal because his his ex-wife took all of his money, and that asking to get paid for the thumbnails he made was tantamount to scamming an old veteran trying to end global hunger. The worst part of this is, despite having just shamelessly scammed this guy, he continued to try and trick him into making even more thumbnails for him for free. In one of his emails, he said, "I figured you would just like the fact you'll be known as Shoenice's thumbnail master until 2030. At this point, Chris had over 500,000 subscribers and was regularly pulling in tens of thousands of views on every video. Yet, his behavior hadn't changed the least bit since 2012. The lying never stopped or slowed down, regardless of how successful or not he was. It's hard to tell whether or not he kept scamming people out of habit, or if he truly blew through all of his money so fast he had to scam people all the time to keep feeding his habits. What's interesting is that Tubes' video came out at a time when exposés about people who were scammed by bigger creators were at an all-time high. So despite how irrelevant Shoenice was at the time, the video got to 500,000 views, prompting Shoenice to respond in the only way he knew.
Tubes, he can't fight. That motherfucker does fucking thumbnails and gets ripped off, so he must be a pussy.
He eventually did cough up $50, but not without thoroughly insulting Tubes in the process.
Tubes, you're such a loser. And you know you are, bro. You said you were eating crumbs when I caught you on Facebook out at a bar.
The last significant blip in popularity happened for Shoenice in 2015, when he took part in a Tosh.0 episode that got to almost 2 million views. But after that, he became increasingly desperate for attention, being somewhat self-aware that his YouTube fame was long gone. In 2016, he tried to become a UFC fighter and fight Ted Barris, which technically would make him early to the influencer fighting game, which is pretty funny to think about. But like hundreds of other business ventures and content ideas that Shoenice proposed, nothing ever came of it. Another one of his schemes was when he hooked up with the Brown Bag Boys to sell brown bags with his name on them. It's pretty difficult to figure out what he was actually trying to do here, because while it initially looks like he's gonna start selling merch, you realize the only product he's promoting is literally a brown paper bag. At the same time, he's encouraging people to buy his bags. He also says you're supposed to bring the bag to a party that they're gonna host and fill it up with food to donate to the homeless. But near the end of the video announcement, he then straight up asks for donations, no paper bag required. He claims that the proceeds will all go to charity, but doesn't say what charity or how he's going to distribute the money to that charity. I'm not even sure that the Brown Bag Boys exist, because if you look up that name, you find absolutely nothing. I don't know what kind of schizophrenic scam he was trying to pull off here, but fortunately, I don't think it really fooled anyone into sending him anything. But his behavior didn't limit itself to scams, as around 2016, he began threatening to leave YouTube forever or start uploading to other platforms, usually blaming one of his enemies and telling his audience to go harass them, even though at that point, he had lost whatever loyal following he once had who may have been interested in doing that. Later on in 2016, he took part in an episode of the Painkiller Already podcast, which was by far one of the largest pieces of pure exposure Shoenice had ever gotten. While it does seem he managed to keep himself sober for the recording, his compulsive lying was also kicking into high gear. When the topic of money was brought up 10 minutes into the episode, he went on a tangent about being bad with money because he just gave so much to the homeless. He felt too bad about having money to keep it for himself. Immediately after that, he drank some Elmer's glue. If ever there was a sequence of events that summarized the entirety of Shoenice's life, this would be a perfect fit. When he finally got to addressing his haters who accused him of scamming people, he describes them as 6 drunk men who get on Google Hangouts to come up with conspiracies to destroy his life. Usually, Chris lies to get money for beer and weed, but when he's had his fill of both, he just lies to make himself look good. Throughout the episode, he constantly brags about how much people loved his comedy, to the point where they'd clap and ask for encores when he got off stage, asking for another set from the guy who doesn't even get paid. Even in his fantasy world, he's still trying to paint himself as an altruist who purposely doesn't take money from anyone. Then he goes on to brag about how good he is at fighting, despite never training in his life, because according to him, he was born a badass. It seems like whenever you let Shoenice talk for over 5 minutes straight, he reveals himself to be mentally 10 years old. At the 24-minute mark, he starts talking about Leafy's commentary video about him, visibly upset about the fact it got way more views than his actual videos, claiming that YouTube was purposely punishing his channel because he had previously moved his content to a competitor platform. And perhaps the funniest part of the entire thing is when he tries to explain his e-begging on Facebook.
Trolls, I used to just make videos. You got to pay me $5 to be a friend of mine on Facebook, and I really didn't need it, but I knew haters would take them videos. And I formed hate on purpose, because hate versus good, you know, it brings conflict, and conflict brings change. And I'm going to change the world through a YouTube community. So all my little haters, they'll be kneeling along the other masses when I become the next Messiah. Sounds kind of weird. Hold on, can I take another hit?
Yeah, of glue? What is he hitting right now?
Well, just some tobacco.
And one of the funniest things he does is actually bragging about how many sources of income he has, from YouTube to merch to his proudest one, lifelong disability checks. In this instance, it's not that I doubt he has a lot of income sources, more so, I take issue with him neglecting to mention that his drug habits instantly pulverize all the money he gets. Another highlight of the podcast is when one of Shoenice's long-standing lies that he's told both in the Vice documentary and his appearance on the Tosh.0 show was unceremoniously destroyed.
So I got a question for you. I watched the Vice documentary. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And I guess you used to live with either your wife or a serious girlfriend, and she kicked you out because she couldn't handle the fame.
Yeah, I lied about that on
I thought you might have.
Vice.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was actually from my pill addiction. That's right. I was breaking up prostitution.
No, Vice was really kind.
Honestly, it's not surprising since the idea that his wife would rather her son grow up without a dad than deal with fame was always asinine, but it is a bit shocking how nonchalantly he admits to having lied for years to hide his pill addiction. Don't get me wrong though, this isn't Chris taking accountability for being on pills, as he immediately goes on to blame the hospital that gave him those pills after he broke his back. He then pretends that he quit pills and the alcohol with no issue, and says that only weak-minded people have a hard time quitting opiates. The thing is, we know his issues got much worse after his rise to YouTube fame. About an hour into the episode, he claims his YouTube career dwindling is fine because it's only a resume, as he's now working with a company with a tractor trailer full of equipment, suggesting he was going to become an actor, something that I strongly doubt.
What was your question again, sir?
How many times have you been arrested? And
Oh yeah,
offenses?
probably like I'd say 12. Well, one was for marijuana possession as a teenager. One was for breaking into my dad's house after he threw me out and having a house party, but he dropped the charges. Then I fought with the police a lot. That was 4 or 5 times. And then I broke
battles with the law enforcement officers.
I was a hero to that city. I broke up a bad prostitution sting.
At this point, even if he wanted to get into the entertainment industry, he'd have a very hard time since he threw everyone he ever worked with under the bus, including Daniel Tosh. Despite how Daniel Tosh featuring him gave his online presence a real second wind, on PKA, Chris complained about having his improvised material cut out of the show, claiming that Tosh was envious of how naturally funny he was. He then added that Comedy Central didn't even pay him to stay 2 nights at a motel, which he found outrageous. When the topic of the military comes up, Chris brings up the story of him hitting a soldier with his car, but claims that he fabricated the story in the first place. And the truth is that he actually hit a camel. I don't know why he thinks admitting to having lied will make anyone trust that he isn't lying this time, especially when he's so pathological about it. It seems much more likely that the first story is true, given how upset he got when people made fun of him for it, and now he has a new explanation to get people off his back. Despite only taking part in 1 hour of this episode of PKA, more lore was dug up from this appearance than from 5 years of his content. Of course, the new set of tall tales he rattled off had a very negative effect, giving a lot of ammunition to his trolls, who went on to make entire compilations of every single time he scammed his audience. But due to him having nothing else going on at this point in his life, the next 2 years of his online activity were entirely made up of his eternal wars against other YouTubers. In one video, he can be seen drunk and lying on the dirt in some park, fighting his detractors.
Ted Barris, your mom got killed by your dad. Not my problem. I don't know how your mom getting killed by your dad makes me kids.
Later on, he admits to being homeless and resorting to sleeping outside of a mall.
Because I'm sleeping out on the side of a fucking mall. Yeah, you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to do that. I didn't have to do what? Entertain you f***ers? I've done this way before the internet. F***ers.
Which he blames on his fans not donating enough money to him.
Is your fucking volume working now? Is your volume working now? You, Wesley Chippy, and your scumbag fiance.
If you didn't quite catch that, he's saying, "Is your volume working now?" in reference to the people who have been pointing out for years that the audio on his videos was too low, an issue he consistently made zero effort to fix. Keep in mind, I only played a fraction of the whole thing, but there's actually plenty more where that came from as he continues to scream about random online people for the rest of the video's runtime. This was by far the lowest Shoenice had ever been, and it seemed like he was actually going insane. In his long-winded psychotic rampage, he started beefing with his own son, who he had been away from for so long that he was already an adult at this point.
Hey, Christopher, nice talking to you again, whatever. Either way, can you have your mom start the divorce proceedings so we can end this all? Because you guys have been living rent-free for the last 8 years. You're an adult now, and she's been an adult for a long time. Grow up, we're splitting the property.
So can you tell her that, Shoenice Jr.?
Soon after he asked for divorce proceedings, there's an online record that his ex-wife filed for divorce, which apparently hadn't been done up until that point. Also during this period was his beef against a very large YouTuber, Ethan Klein of H3H3. Back in 2015, Ethan made a video covering YouTubers who film themselves doing charity to make themselves look good. In it, Shoenice is featured, since he constantly talked about how much he gave to the homeless and his work towards ending global hunger. Funnily enough, he went as far as listing volunteering to the homeless everywhere for the past 40 years on his LinkedIn. But fortunately for Shoenice, Ethan didn't cover any of his scams, focusing exclusively on him exploiting some homeless lady for views. And what was Shoenice's graceful response? Ethan Klein doesn't give a single fuck about his subscribers. Jewish people are greedy and only care for themselves. At Ela Klein is a whore. Reasonably, Ethan was pretty taken aback, to which Shoenice responded by promising he was going to troll him for the rest of his life. They went back and forth a bit, with Ethan and Ela dunking on him for eating toilet paper and being homeless. Admittedly, it must be hard to cast stones when you live in a glass homeless shelter, so Chris was definitely fighting an uphill battle here from the start. But eventually, he escalated the conflict by addressing them in a few videos.
Ethan and Ela, what is it, Ela? Fucking Bigfoot? Whatever, she's ugly as f***. You guys are gonna sit there and rip on the smaller YouTubers feeding the homeless? Ethan, go fuck yourself. Seriously, H3H3 is overrated and you got a bunch of robot fucking people watching you.
But this was just the beginning, as he became increasingly erratic and resentful toward Ethan.
Ethan, you were a fucking scumbag emo 5 years ago, and now you think you're some kind of a god, fucking raising money for people. All I want to know is whose is bigger, yours or Ela?
At this point in time, he launched one of his many attempts to switch to a different platform to see if that would revive his dead online career, and unsurprisingly, it didn't really work. He moved to LiveLeak, a website that was mostly dedicated to videos of people dying, but when he failed to get his videos featured on the homepage, he posted this.
All you fucking people care about are people dying? Oh my god, I can't even watch the fucking featured videos on this fucking pitiful website. Suck my dick and go watch another fucking innocent person die. What has humanity come to? Kiss my ass, suck my dick, lick my nuts. My dead mother.
It seemed like Shoenice's story was coming to a screeching halt. He had burned every bridge and completely wasted whatever momentum he was given by Vice and Tosh, and scammed his audience whenever he could along the way. He had no friends in the eating weird things community, and his audience had long abandoned him. In 2018, the H3 podcast uploaded a clip titled Shoenice is Insane that sits at 1 million views. In it, they show a 16-second clip of Ethan mentioning one of Shoenice's videos to Bert Kreischer. Somehow, despite how passive of a mention this was, Shoenice caught wind of it and left literally dozens of comments through multiple accounts, all suggesting that Ethan and Ela should forgive him for the things he'd previously said about them and have him on their show. Some of the accounts are even named things like Shoenice Revival and Shoenice Redemption. Despite his efforts, they did not have him on, which made him grow increasingly angry, so he then started threatening to sue them. While threatening to sue H3, he blames Logan Paul's forest incident on why his main channel was shut down, and says Ethan and Ela only ripped on him because he got more views than them, when that's obviously not the case because his channel had been dead for years. As a matter of fact, the last time he talked about them, he complained about them punching down and attacking smaller channels, but now he was bragging about being more famous than them. Then he says he could sue them to take their video down because he's a veteran of Desert Storm. I think this video was the Elmer's glue talking, not him. A few months later, in November 2019, Ethan posted another video where he expressed he wanted to get Shoenice on the podcast, but was apprehensive to do so because he wasn't sure what version of Shoenice would show up. The funny guy who eats tampons, or the psychotic homeless man who screams at strangers on the internet. Ethan's producer had this to say.
He sent me an email that said, I am the most non-violent person in the world. I run from confrontations. And that he's been going through a lot.
Remember, this is the same guy who said he could beat everyone's ass and fought 20 cops on PKA. Speaking of PKA, one of the things he mentioned there was that he was once mistakenly diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but judging from his behavior towards H3, it's possible that diagnosis wasn't a mistake at all. Ignoring their better judgment, everyone in the H3 podcast ultimately wanted Shoenice on, if he could guarantee he wouldn't go crazy. And a week later, it happened. During the episode, he said his insults at them were simple attempts to get more attention, followed by an apology to Ela over what he'd said about her. To many people's surprise, there was actually no friction between Shoenice and the host during this conversation, and it was a pretty good interaction with some funny highlights.
Do you look back on your childhood fondly, or are you glad that you're now an adult on your own?
There's never ever a time when I look back at my childhood. My father led his life by his
My mom was a drunk in a Chevy van. She'd go on cruises, and we were left home alone on a farm. We were kicked out of so many apartment buildings for shutting the power down when women were on oxygen tanks. We were on the front paper for starting a forest fire in a mountain. But I'm telling you right now, bro. What was the question?
Much like with PKA, he also provides a lot more details about his life that were either unknown or poorly documented. He elaborates on how he injured his back and got on pills, saying he fell through a skylight and got a settlement of $500,000, which he says he immediately blew on weed, video games, and St. Bernard dogs for his kids. For most people, $500,000 is the kind of money that's going to take years, if not decades to spend. And that's if you invest none of it. I get that Chris was paying for his whole family for a while, but still, it's hard to believe he made $500,000 evaporate that fast, to the point he was now completely broke and relying on donations to not be homeless. After about an hour of Shoenice speaking on 2x speed with his earbud mic taped to his chin, occasionally eating some toilet paper or a gigantic peanut butter cup, he got off the call because his power was about to get cut. For the time being, this looks like a pretty decent development in favor of Shoenice, as both Ethan and Hila expressed they felt a lot better about him, feeling empathy for his situation with his family and wanting to see him make a comeback. If you weren't familiar with the kind of guy who Shoenice was, you could easily come away from this podcast thinking things were looking up, holding out some hope that the guy would be able to redeem himself. Unfortunately, he fell right back into his old ways. Shoenice uploaded a now deleted video where he claimed his appearance on the podcast was a troll and he was just stringing Ethan along.
We did it, guys. We did it. We trolled H3H3. What a loser. What a fucking scrubneck. Disrespects people like me. I win, Ethan. I win. I will always win against H3H3 because that's who I am. I'm a legend.
I guess this is the narrative he has to spin to avoid admitting he basically begged to be on Ethan's show. In the same video, he mocks Ethan's Tourette's, claiming that Ethan is faking it, which I don't even really understand. Additionally, Ethan showed the dozens of emails he'd been sending them, the majority of which are just him begging to be on the show, with the last few having the subject line filled out with phrases like, "I always win," and "bye bye losers." Despite all of that, the H3 crew actually continued to sympathize with him, pointing out that he's a damaged guy with a lot of issues who may not be aware of how much he hurts himself with these stunts. Given how H3 made it clear they actually wanted to have him on the show, Shoenice probably could have come on again, which would have greatly helped him rebuild the online presence he once had. But instead, he chose to squander it, opting to beat his chest and claim victory over Ethan, though the only thing he successfully did was not behave like a lunatic for about 30 minutes once. This really clarifies his mindset. Whenever he tells someone a lie or tricks them into engaging with him, it's a win in his book, and he's too proud to see it any other way, even if he's at rock bottom. Unsurprisingly, his newest channel has continued to flounder in obscurity over the past 4 years, partly because of his obnoxious behavior, and partly because he barely even makes new content, instead just re-uploading his greatest hits and hoping they'll go viral. And this is where the Shoenice story basically falls off a cliff. In 2021, a man with his same name who lives in the same place he does was arrested for a misdemeanor, though it's somewhat difficult to tell if this is actually him. One of the most recent videos on his channel is supposedly an announcement of his retirement, but in the actual video, he clarifies he's been sober for a year and is getting in shape for a YouTuber boxing fight that will get him his clout back. It's unclear who he'll be fighting, and honestly, it seems he doesn't know it himself, since he mentions it might be YouTuber Steve will do it, or someone else entirely. Soon after, he says he's no longer on YouTube and is now uploading to TikTok, adding that he had one of his accounts taken down, which he blames H3H3 for, despite them not having anything to do with it. Unfortunately, that's what he chose to let himself amount to. A few funny videos from a decade ago, and a whole lot of incoherent belligerence in between. It didn't have to be like this. Shoenice could have turned the videos of him being funny into a real career for at least a few years, but that's not what he did. I've been Turkey Tom, thanks for watching, and until next time, thank y'all for watching. Bye.